Jeopardy! Host Ken Jennings was taken aback by a contestant's harsh take on Monday's episode. Shawn McShane revealed skipping Long Island, New York on a statewide bike trip entailed not missing much. The non-profit associate from West Islip, New York faced Chris Bonifacio, a website manager from Raleigh, North Carolina, and one-day winner Matthew Watt, an accountant from Boston, Massachusetts. Shawn did not mince words when it came to his hometown during Jeopardy's Q&A portion. He may have to hide if he visits. Ken, 48, prompted, "You must be something of a cyclist, what did you do this summer?" Shawn replied, "I took a week and a half off work and rode my bike the entire length of New York State. From the Canadian border all the way down to Battery Park in Manhattan," he continued. Ken replied, spotting how the buck stopped there for Shawn's trek, and asked, "You didn't decide to go all the way out on Long Island as well?" holding out his arm in the style of a peninsula. "I'm not missing much," Shawn replied. Ken, originally from Seattle, Washington, where he still lives today in a $3 million abode, burst out laughing. Once he pulled himself together, the host replied, "A harsh judgment for our viewers from Long Island." Screw Long Island? The host moved on after Shawn seemed to go for the jugular on Long Island and its lack of scenery. One fan wrote under a YouTube clip, "He basically biked all the way down Broadway, which begins, and ends, at Battery Park, and screw Long Island." Another wrote to Twitter, "Not cool, Jeopardy! Dude who just hated on Long Island. Sincerely, a longtime Jeopardy watcher presently watching from Long Island." A third salty fan tweeted, "What a beatard dissing Long Island." And a fourth, "I'm guessing Ken doesn't realize that West Islip, where Shawn is from, is on Long Island." A fifth piled on, "I'm sorry, I got bad vibes from Shawn before the Long Island incident, so I'm cackling at everybody rallying against him." Note to contestants equals dissing specific parts of the US is not how you use your little story time with Ken, wrote one more. Jeopardy! Drought. Tonight's final Jeopardy read. Originally, this three-word phrase referred to when a doctor or apothecary substituted one medicine for another. No one was correct with quid pro quo, Shawn simply wrote, but held on to his lead and wound up with $20,600 total. Just last week all three players were stumped on a final Jeopardy about Manhattan, which also seemed like an easy one to viewers. Shawn is now the fifth player in 5 games to become a new champion. No one has won more than 2 games in a week. Super champion and fan favorite Chris Ponullo lost on Tuesday after 21 wins and a winnings total of $748,000. Fans on Reddit have become stunned by the carousel of new winners, as one spotted, "It's the longest there hasn't been a 2-day champ since 2018. One person comes in and takes out a good runner and then no one can keep a streak, one knocked after tonight. Bring back Chris," lamented another. "I miss Chris," wrote a third as a fourth agreed, "Me too." Another one-day champ. "Where the heck is Chris?" asked a fifth. "One game curse is trending again?" So, longest no-repeat champion run after a super champ since Seth Wilson in 2018, and if Shawn doesn't win tomorrow, it will be the longest other than after Arthur Chu was defeated in 2014. One more wrote. Chris lost to Andy Terrell, a political science and international relations professor from San Diego, California, who then went on to lose the following night. From there, no player has been able to win 2 games and there seems to be a Jeopardy! Drought as a result. 17 of Chris's 21 wins were runaways, meaning by Final Jeopardy no one could catch him, making fans think he was going to keep winning. He also went 48 for 49 on daily double clues before his last game. Chris even won by so much per game that execs called losing to him getting panuloed. Those who have won more games than Chris in Jeopardy! History are Ken, 74 games, Amy Schneider, 40 games, Matt Amodio, 38 games, James Holzhauer, 32 games, and Mattea Roach, 23 games. He has won more money than Mattea, thus putting him 5th on the earnings leaderboard. He will return for the 2023 Tournament of Champions. Ken and Mayim Bialik, 47, were announced as the permanent replacements for the late, great Alex Trebek, who left huge shoes to fill after he passed away in 2020 at age 80. Mayim is switching in for Ken in January and is set to host their first ever high school reunion tournament airing in February. The primetime spin-off Celebrity Jeopardy is also resuming in the new year, so Mayim will be hosting that special on Thursdays as well as the regularly airing show. The lights were as bright as ever on the Jeopardy! Stage, the iconic blue and gold set gleaming like polished trivia royalty. It was a typical taping day, 3 contestants, A wide array of categories from opera to obscure animal facts, and Ken Jennings poised behind his lectern with the familiar ease of someone who had once won 74 consecutive games. But nothing could have prepared the longtime host for what happened halfway through Double Jeopardy. The returning champion, a quirky PhD candidate from Seattle named Brandon Rice, had already made a name for himself with his encyclopedic knowledge of 18th-century cartography and penchant for saying boom after every daily double. He was joined by two new contestants, Lisa, a librarian from Missouri, and Jerome, a quick-witted copywriter from Brooklyn. Ken was his usual charming self, tossing in historical facts and light humor as the game moved briskly. But then came the moment that would leave him, and millions of viewers, stunned. The category was American regional cuisine. Brandon selected the $1,600 clue. Ken read, "This sandwich, made with thinly sliced ribeye and provolone cheese, is most famously associated with a Pennsylvania city." Brandon rang in immediately. "What is a cheesesteak?" "Correct," Ken confirmed, flashing his signature smile. Brandon smirked and said under his breath, "Even if it's wildly overrated." A light chuckle fluttered through the studio audience, but Ken tilted his head slightly, as if he hadn't heard him right. "You've got control of the board," Ken prompted, still smiling but with a raised eyebrow. Brandon chose the $2,000 clue in the same category. The clue was, clam chowder lovers often debate over whether this red tomato-based version from the East Coast is superior to the cream-based New England variety. Again, Brandon buzzed in. "What is Manhattan clam chowder?" "Correct." "That's when it happened." Brandon shrugged, looked directly into the camera, and added with a grin, "Only people on the East Coast could think that tastes better. Sorry, but some of us have, taste buds." An audible gasp rose from the audience. Ken blinked. "Wow," Ken said, clearly caught off guard. "Not pulling any punches tonight." Brandon laughed, clearly proud of himself, while Lisa awkwardly glanced down at her podium and Jerome shook his head with a smirk. Ken tried to move on smoothly. "Well, we'll see how the East Coast viewers take that. Might be a rough day on Twitter for you." The rest of the round continued, but the tension lingered. Brandon's comments had hit a nerve, and it didn't take long for the aftermath to unfold both in the studio and online. Backstage after the tapings. During the post-game chat, which is usually light and celebratory, Ken approached the contestants with a curious mix of amusement and concern. "Brandon, you've stirred the clam chowder pot," Ken quipped. Brandon laughed, unfazed. "I mean, come on, Ken, Manhattan clam chowder is just spicy tomato soup with shellfish. The East Coast is great for a lot of things, but food opinions? Debatable." Ken chuckled politely, but it was clear he was still processing the moment. "People really love their regional food," Ken said diplomatically. "I've had both kinds, they each have their charm." Jerome, the Brooklyn native, playfully jabbed, "Spoken like a true centrist, Ken." Brandon smirked again. "Just trying to bring the heat to a game show that's usually too polite." Ken gave him a look, the kind that said, "You may not realize what storm you've kicked up, buddy." The online fallout. The episode aired on a Thursday evening. Within minutes, Jeopardy's official hashtag was trending, not because of a runaway score or a final Jeopardy shocker, but because of hashtag Chowdergate. East Coast Twitter erupted. "Brandon from Jeopardy! Really just insulted the entire East Coast. Who hurt this man? At Nikki NYC. Manhattan clam chowder slander on national TV? Unforgivable, at Boston." Steve 617. "He's lucky Alex Trebek isn't around to see this blasphemy," at Trivia, Queen 83. Even a few regional restaurants jumped in. A famed clam shack in Rhode Island posted a picture of their chowder with the caption, "Sorry, Brandon. These taste buds disagree." By Friday morning, the New York Post had published a tongue-in-cheek headline. "Cheesy contestant roasts East Coast chowder in Jeopardy jab, host left stunned." Ken Jennings was mentioned in several write-ups as having been visibly caught off guard, with a freeze-frame image of his blinking reaction going mildly viral. Ken's response. By Saturday, Ken addressed the moment during an Instagram Q&A. A fan asked, "What was going through your mind when Brandon shaded East Coast food?" Ken replied with a selfie holding a bowl of clam chowder, New England style. Caption, "Staying neutral. But let's not start a food war, folks. Hashtag Jeopardy, love." It was classic Ken, diplomatic, witty, and peacekeeping. But the comment section revealed that fans were still split, with some defending Brandon's sass while others called it disrespectful. Brandon's return. The following week, Brandon returned to defend his title. Ken greeted him warmly, but not without a jab. "Welcome back, Brandon. Our West Coast culinary critic." Brandon laughed, but seemed slightly more reserved. "After last week's Chowder commentary, I'm expecting someone to send me lobster in the mail as revenge," Brandon joked. Ken grinned. "Let's hope it's not still alive." As the game kicked off, Ken offered a new category: bridges over troubled Chowder. The audience burst into laughter. It was a brilliant save, a classic Jeopardy! Moment of humor and trivia woven together. And it subtly reminded viewers that, on this long-running show where intellect rules, even controversy can be handled with grace, and maybe a side of oyster crackers. Closing thoughts. Though Brandon ultimately lost his title that night, his comments earned him a place in the pantheon of memorable Jeopardy! Contestants, not for his winnings, but for the shade he threw with a single smirk and a seafood slur. And for Ken Jennings? It was another reminder that no matter how many thousands of clues he's read, Jeopardy! Always has a few surprises left in its question-laden vault.